Hello guys, welcome back. This is part 57 of SQL Server. In this session, we will learn about transaction in SQL Server. Before continuing with this session, I strongly recommend to watch part 56 of this video series. So what is a transaction? A transaction is a group of commands that change the data stored in a database. A transaction is treated as a single unit. A transaction ensures that either all of the commands succeed or none of them. If one of the commands in the transaction fails, all of the command fails, and any data that was modified in the database is then rolled back. In this way, transaction maintain the integrity of data in a database. Let's look at an example. So go to the SQL Server Management Studio. So I have this table TBL product, which has got information about laptops and desktop. At the moment, the quantity of laptop available is 100. Now let's say I want to change the quantity to 200. And to do that, we are issuing this update statement. So to do this, we are issuing this update statement, update TBL product, set quantity available is equal to 200, where product ID is equal to 1. Now when I execute this statement, you can see that one row affected. So let me execute this. One row affected. Now when we select the data back, you should see the quantity available is 200. So execute this. So now the quantity available is 200, which was 100 earlier. Now this update statement is not part of any transaction. Now this update statement is not part of any transaction. So as soon as you execute this update statement, the change is made permanent to the database immediately. On the other hand, you can make this update statement belong to a transaction by including begin transaction. So now let's try to change the quantity to 300. So now this update statement is part of the transaction. So now this update statement is the part of the transaction. When we execute these two statements together, look at this, it says one row affected. One row affected. Now from within the same window, within the same connection, when I select the data back from the table, look at this, it shows 300. But then let's try to make another connection to this SQL Server. So this is a different connection. Now when I try to select the data from the same table, look at what is going to happen. It says executing query. It says executing query. And then if you look at product table, it has got only 2 rows to select that row from that table. It should take less than a second. But if you look at this, it is almost more than 16 seconds. Now it is still executing. That is because you have initiated this transaction. You have initiated this transaction, but you did not either commit this or roll this back, because of which other user will not be able to see that uncommitted data by default. And that is because SQL Server default isolation level is read committed. Meaning read only committed data. But here, if you look at this, there is some uncommitted data. In this TBL product, in this TBL product table. That is why I am not able to see that data from that table. So let's cancel that. And if I want to see the data, what I can do is basically set the transaction isolation level read uncommitted data. Okay, so let's do that. Set transaction isolation level to read uncommitted. So let's execute this command. So let's execute this. Command completed successfully. Now if I execute this select star from TBL product table, I am able to see the read uncommitted data. Now when I roll this transaction back, this transaction back, execute this. Okay. Execute this. Command completed successfully. Now look at this. When I execute select star from TBL product, before we execute select star from TBL product, this is the previous data. Uncommitted 300. Uncommitted 300. Now when I execute this query, so look at this, this is 300. When I execute this query, it will go back to previous data, means it will undo the change. So execute this, so 200. So look at this, the change is undone because we roll back the transaction. So now whenever you update, insert, delete statements, whenever these are part of a transaction, now the change is not made immediately permanent to the database until you commit that transaction. So if you want the change permanent, you commit the transaction. If you want to undo the change, then you roll back the transaction. Okay, to undo the change, then you roll back the transaction. So for example, let's say at the minute you know a quantity available for laptop is 200. Let's try to change it to 300 as part of the transaction. So execute this. One row affected. And then to make the change permanent, I basically have to say commit transaction. So to make that change permanent, I basically have to say commit transaction. At this point, the change is made permanent to the database. So execute this. So at this point, the change is made permanent to the database. Now transaction processing follows very simple steps. So transactions processing follows the very simple steps. You begin a transaction using begin transaction, and then you process the database commands. You might have one or more SQL Server command, insert, updates, and deletes, and then you check for any error. If there are errors, you roll the transaction backs. Otherwise, you commit the transaction. Look at the example. I have two tables here. Where are the tables? Okay, these are the two tables. I have two tables here. TBL physical address and TBL mailing address. Now in reality, let's say we are shopping online. Most of the e-commerce sites have mailing address and billing address. And most of us will have the same mailing and billing address. Along the same line here, if you look at this, we have physical and mailing address And if you look at this employee 101 and 101 has the same mailing and physical address. Now if you look at the London, you know the city spelling is misspelled, London, London, okay, misspelled city name. And obviously I want to correct this. To correct this, I have stored procedure. To correct this, I have a stored procedure. Here, and if you look at this stored procedure, it is pretty simple. Pretty simple one. All we are doing here is we are updating mailing address. Table and physical address table, and we are setting the city to the correct spelling, okay. And if you look at these two updates statement, these are wrapped between begin transaction and commit transaction block, and this block is further wrapped between begin try and try block. And then following the try block is the catch block. Where we are rolling the transaction back. We have spoken about handling errors using try-catch blocks in the previous session of this video series. If you are new to error handling, please check that video first. Okay, so obviously when we execute this, when we execute this stored procedure, what is going to happen? It is going to execute the first update statement, and then it is going to execute the second update statement. If there are no errors, the transaction will be committed. If there are errors, whenever you executing first or second statement, what is going to happen? The control will immediately be transferred to catch block. The control will immediately be transferred to catch block. Within the catch block, we are rolling the transaction back. Okay. Now, since these are two simple update statements, both of these statements should succeed and correct the city spelling to London. Let's look at this. So I have these two tables. So go back to the SQL Server Management Studio. So I have these two tables. Physical address and mailing address. So if you look at this at the minute, the city spelling is incorrect. And we have same stored procedure that we have seen on the slide. Which update the mailing address and the physical address tables. And then in addition, we also have print transaction committed. print transaction committed, just to print a message, to prove that it committed the transaction. So let's create this stored procedure now. So let's create this stored procedure now. And now before we execute this, let's quickly check the data in physical address and mailing address. Let's quickly check the data in the physical address and the mailing address. The spelling is incorrect, LONTOON. So let's execute this stored procedure. So let's execute this stored procedure. So one row affected, one row affected. So the first one row affected is when we updated the mailing address. The second one is when we updated the physical address. And then we have that transaction committed message printed by this print statement, which means the transaction has been committed. So now when we check the physical and mailing address, you should see the spelling is now corrected. So let me execute these. So now the spelling is correct, LONTON, single O. Okay, spelling is now corrected. Spelling is now corrected now. Now let's try to introduce an error. Let's try to introduce an error intentionally. Now if you look at the second statement, this is the same stored procedure. This is the same stored procedure. Look at the second update statement. Second statement has got, here we are setting the city London. Okay. Basically, what we are trying to do here is, if you look at the column length, go back to the SQL Server Studio and see the column length. Column length of city. The city column length in TBL physical address table. So if you look at the city column length, it is 10 character. It is 10 character. But now I am trying to update the physical address to London. London space London is definitely more than the 10 characters. So obviously when this update statement is this update statement is being executed, we will get an error. Now let's change the mailing address to London 1. Now when we change this stored procedure, let's change this. So alter procedure Now when we execute this stored procedure, what is going to happen? So now when we execute this stored procedure, what is going to happen? It comes here, it updates the mailing address, okay, to London 1, which is fine. And then when it comes to update the physical address, what is going to happen? Okay, the city column length is 10 in physical address table, but the value is more than 10. But here the value is more than 10. So this is going to throw an exception. So when an exception occurs, what is going to happen? The control immediately goes to the catch block, rolling back the transaction. So when we roll the transaction back, what is going to happen? Whatever change that was made by this first update statement is also going to be undone. So this update statement change it to London 1, but then it will be rolled back. So it will remain London. And then it finally print the transaction rollback. So let me execute this stored procedure. Okay. You see that one row affected, then it says 0 row affected. So it first update this city. To London 1, and then when it tried to do this, we got that 0 rows affected. So because there was an error when we are trying to execute this, immediately the control will go to the catch block, rollback transaction, and you should see print transaction rolled back. Transaction rollback. As a result of which, if you now select the data from these two tables, you should see as if we did not update anything. So execute. So here you should see as if we did not update anything because the transaction is rolled back. So both of these statements are treated as a single unit because the transaction ensures either both of them succeed or none of them, and in this way transaction maintain the integrity of the database. Now we discussed that a transaction is a group of database commands. Now what database Now, what database commands are part of a transaction? Is determined by an acid test. Is determined by acid test. Meaning the command that belong in a transactions have to be atomic, consistent, isolated, and durable. What we mean by this acid test, we will look at in next video session. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day. But before going, let me show you the creation of the table, because most of the student wants to see the creation of the table. So where is the creation of the table? Here is the creation of the table. You should see that. So table product, creation of the table product, and the sample data inserted in it. And then this is the physical address creation table, as you can see, and the data sample data inserted in the TBL physical address table, and the creation of TBL mailing address. Okay, guys, that's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.